So at this point here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to level the scope. So I'll have my scope sitting across the turret like this, my level, sitting across the turret like that. I'll adjust my scope as it gets to be level, using my barrel level as a reference. And then once that's level, I'll start torquing down my screws, and this is where your torque driver comes in. You do not want to over torque your screws, because you will crush the tube, it will drop the erector, and your scope will be garbage. So what I've got here is a feeler gauge, and I've got my torque driver. I'm going to stick my feeler gauge in on one side, and I'm just going to tighten it up until I get a little bit of drag on that feeler gauge. Only a little bit there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just so there's a consistent air gap on both sides. And as you're doing this, as you tighten up one side, what you'll see is you'll look at your bubble, and you'll see your bubble will shift towards the side that you've just tightened. So that's why I want to make sure you go on opposite sides of it, like this side, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, and that way it will settle the scope evenly. And you're going to do the same thing when you torque them. So once you set your air gap and it's relatively consistent, in this case here, I've got a 6/1000 of an inch feeler gauge, and if it starts to bite and you still don't have any torque on it, you have a little bit of drag on the feeler gauge, you have no torque, then you just go next size down, next size down, next size down, until you get a little bit of torque on it and you get a little bit of drag. And then you apply your final torque. I usually torque it in 2 stages, so I'll put a preload on. Most manufacturers recommend your maximum torque be around 18 inch-pounds, so I'll put a preload of 10 on. And like I said, I'll go left to right. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. Okay, now I'll check my gap, my feeler gauge. And then if it's a consistent air gap on all sides of the rings, I apply my final torque. Left, right, left, right, left, right. You can see why it's a lot easier with a proper set of scope levels. You have to dig mine out. Okay, now that I've done this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the customer back behind the rifle as if he was going to be using it, and then I'll have him check the diopter again, check the eye relief again, make sure that's still good. And then the last thing to do is to bore sight and to zero. So that's the whole process of how to mount an optic on a rifle properly.